Let's come to this now. The former chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, that's Themba Godi, worked closely with Kimi Makwetu. Makwetu was critical of irregular expenditure in government, saying it reflects how the mismanagement of finances, fraud and theft were not taken seriously in government. Let's now reflect on Makwetu's time in office with Godi, who joins us now all the way from Mpumalanga. Mr. Godi, thank you so much for your time. But fortunately, under these circumstances, this is what brings us to this conversation at this point. I mean, you've worked closely with Mr. Makwetu, an honorable man who was known to be serious yet human, but also who stood by ethics and integrity. Just take us through your time while working with him.
Thank you very much. It is indeed a very sad death. Of course, all death is sad, but here is a man who was a good example of an ideal public servant, a very simple man who carried within him the mixture of his rural background and the urban environment that he stayed in, and who in his work tried to simplify complex concepts and processes arising from his audit work in a manner and way that will be understandable to the average person.
Yeah. What legacy does he leave behind, if I may ask? Because I understand that only 2 weeks ago, a farewell event was hosted in his honor. He was the outgoing AG, about to hand over the reins to Tsakani Maluleke. What legacy do you think he leaves behind?
Well, look, I would cite maybe two things. Firstly, it is the fact that at a time when we have seen institutions of state being captured, politicized or factionalized, he was able to weather the storm and keep the Auditor-General's office above that clutter. And secondly, you recall that some few years back, the audit profession, not only in the world but specifically in South Africa, went through a very bad period. His office remained one of those few audit institutions that held up to their professional work. But I think in relation specifically to his work in government, you will recall that towards the end of his tenure, we saw a rise in late submission of audits.
Right. Because
of contestations. There were threats of court action by entities and even threats to the very lives of his staff, but they held the fort and maintained their integrity. I think, for me, that is what will leave to those that will be taking over from him. How do you sustain integrity in a sea of all manner of wrong things that were happening in our country?
Absolutely. Well, due to time, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us, former Scopa chairperson, Themba Godi.